continuing on, we're moving on to knowledge part 4, the responsibility and authority of the remote pick or pilot in command. Before the drone takes off, we must designate who the pilot in command is going to be. Why is that important? Well, it's because the remote pilot in command is directly responsible for all that happens with the drone, really. You're the final authority, you're the final say. If you say left, the drone needs to go left. Now, you might chuckle and say, well, if I'm flying the drone, why do I have to designate that? Well, let's just take a situation in your classroom. You may have a student that you hand the drone controls to and say, here, little Jimmy, fly the drone. As Jimmy's flying the drone, you might say, now turn it to the left, aim the camera over there, take a picture of this, or, hey, don't fly into that tree, or watch out over here. You are the pilot in command. Even though you're not manipulating the controls of that drone, you are still in command. And so it's important before we start to designate that, especially when you got a group of maybe 2 or 3 people that are working together, and maybe you're trying to get some pictures of the school. And little Jimmy's flying the drone over the school. The principal's right there, saying what he wants for pictures. And all of a sudden you say, hey, wait a minute, don't fly over there. No. And the principal says, oh, yeah. Who's the student going to listen to? It's important to designate who is in command because basically they have final authority. If they say go left, the drone needs to go left. And also keep in mind that the pick is also liable. So you accept liability for where that drone goes, not the person manipulating the controls. Now, if they disobey your orders, yes, they're liable. But as long as they follow your direct orders to the letter, you are the one who's liable should anything go wrong. Pilot in command. Third thing to consider with the remote pilot in command is you are responsible to ensure the drone poses no undue hazard to anyone else, aircraft, or property in the event that the drone is lost, i.e. you lose control. It's flying along great, all of a sudden it heads to the ground, and there's nothing you can do about it because you didn't notice the low battery signal or an engine quit. And so as the remote pilot in command, you need to always be thinking, what if? What's my contingency? I'm flying here. If an engine kicks out or something happens, where am I going? What's going on? You always need to be thinking one step ahead. Because the reality is when that engine dies, there's no warning signs. It's not like in the movies where the scary music comes on and you know something's coming. It just goes. Always be ready. Because you are responsible to ensure that even when it loses control, you don't hit anybody. And so saying, well, the engine died, I'm not responsible. Yes, you are responsible. You are responsible even if something malfunctions or breaks. Why? You did a pre-flight check. You said it was safe to fly, and it wasn't. So remote pilot in command, be sure that's identified and designated before the flight because liability lies with that person. Fourthly, the remote pilot in command must ensure that this small UAS complies with all regulations. You got to be legal. You are the final authority. If I'm flying the drone, I'm manipulating controls, but you are the remote pilot in command, and you say, take that drone up to 500 feet because I want to get a really cool photograph. And I say, hey, wait a minute, the regulations say, which they do, that 400 feet is the maximum altitude we can take that drone to. I can legally fly it to 500 feet because you told me to. You are the pilot in command. You are the one responsible. And so if it goes to 500 feet, we get caught. You're in trouble, not me. Because you are the remote pilot in command. And so it's important to know who's that person that's in charge because when something happens, everybody's pointing fingers. Always be sure that you have it designated in advance. Lastly, with a remote piloting control, you have to have the ability to direct the small aircraft wherever it's flying. That means I can't be texting or looking at my phone or talking to the neighbor over the fence while little Jimmy's flying the drone. I need to be sure that I'm watching the drone. I know where it's at all times so that I'm able to give directions should something actually occur with the drone while it's. So let's look at number 5 now. Deviating from the rules during emergencies. Can you do it? Well, the rules simply say that in an emergency, all bets are off. Do what you need to do. If you have to go to 500 feet to avoid that hang glider that's coming through the area, you go to 500 feet, even though the rules say you can't go above 400, because in an emergency, to avoid harming someone else, crashing, or otherwise not having a good experience, shall I say, you gotta do what you gotta do. Now you might say, well, if I violate the rules, does that mean I need to report it somehow? Or, how does that work? Because, when we crash and there's damage or something, we got to report it. What happens during emergencies? Do we have to report that as well? Well, the rules explicitly state that when you deviate from a rule, only if the FAA, that's the administrator here, only if the FAA sends you notice or calls you and says, hey, we want a written report, it's the only time you have to submit anything. So I go to 500 feet to avoid the hang glider. He swoops on by. He doesn't even know the drone's there. I drop back down to 350 and I go on my way. If I never hear anything from the FAA, I don't have to report anything. So it's one of those shut your mouth, and only if you're asked do you say anything sort of a situations. So in emergencies, do what you got to do. Whatever it takes to avoid harming someone or crashing into something or otherwise becoming a hazard, do it. And if the FAA should call you up, then you need to submit a report. So that 10-day thing only applies if damage occurs during a crash that's better than $500, then it's not to your drone. So if the drone crashes and it's a $1,000 loss, you don't have to report that. It's just the drone, but it's other things that you would have to report. In emergencies, only if they say you need to tell them, do you have to tell them. Part 6, hazardous operation. What happens when I'm careless or I'm dropping things like a water balloon or something like that? The rules say you cannot endanger the life or property of another person in a reckless manner. You can't do anything intentionally that's considered dangerous. In other words, flying over top of people, that's considered dangerous. Just this last fall, I heard of probably 4, 5, 6 times there were drones flying over top of football games. Somebody decided to be really cool to get some photographs or video from the air of these games, which I agree, those are really cool photographs. You see the videos that the NFL gets sometimes with some of their cameras, and you think, man, it'd be cool if I could get some of those photographs or videos as well. Highly illegal. Consider this. If there's 1,000 people at that football game and I'm flying my drone over top, nothing happens, I don't crash it, I get some really cool videos, FAA finds out. They have the ability, if they want, to fine me $28,500 per incident. Translation, $28,500 per person sitting in the stands, standing on the sidelines, on the field. If there's 1,000 total people there, that's $250,000 they can fine me. Hazardous operations, not a good idea. That also means, flying too close, buzzing your neighbor's house, being reckless or careless in that regard. You can't do it. Really, it comes back to the FAA says you need to be safe. You have to be the responsible one who says, no, this is the way it needs to go. You're also not allowed to drop anything from the drone. So this is why we always want to check and make sure everything's secure, because if you allow an object to be dropped from the aircraft in a manner that creates an undue hazard, you have just violated federal law. Again, $28,500 is kind of their number they love to use as a minimum fine they can give you. That means if I'm checking the drone out and I notice, boy, this camera's kind of dangling a little bit, it'll be all right. I've just agreed that I will be flying hazardously. And if the FAA can prove that, I'm in a world of trouble. So, hazardous operation, don't do it. Let's talk about, what about moving aircrafts, or can I fly it from a car or from a boat that's moving, or any of those sort of things? Basically, the rules are pretty straightforward in that regard. If you're flying an airplane, you can't fly a drone at the same time. If you're riding in an airplane, you can't fly a drone at the same time. So I can't have an airplane circling overhead and be flying a drone down below somehow. The idea is you're moving too fast. You're not able to watch and actually be able to control that drone accurately if there's others around or anything comes in. From a car or a boat, not quite so clear cut. There is an exception. So generally speaking, you are allowed to fly a drone while riding in a moving car, truck, vehicle, or a moving boat if, two things. Number one, you're flying over a sparsely populated area and you're not doing it for hire. You're not getting paid to do it. And as long as those two things are met, you can fly the drone to your content on Lake Michigan while you're running around in a speedboat. Probably not the smartest thing, because every time you hit a wave and it causes your finger to bump the throttle up or down, but you can do it. Here's the trick question. Sparsely populated, what's the definition of that? Yeah, I don't know either. FAA refused to define it. And so really what that means is they're going to wait until somebody does something stupid, and then they're going to say, oh, that's not sparsely populated, and they'll be able to fill it in by that regard. It's kind of another example of a get out of jail free card they have, that if someone's flying recklessly or in a manner that they don't feel is safe from a moving object, this is their way of tagging them and getting them to stop by saying it's not sparsely populated. Because we don't know, is it 50 people in the surrounding land per acre? Is it one person per square mile in the surrounding lands? Is it nobody's within a mile of me at the time I'm flying? We don't know what sparsely populated really means. And so because of that, be very careful on that one.